Welcome to the Lo'awi University for our storytelling of the Mauis, the Maui Gods and the Lineages. I would like to firstly acknowledge the traditional owners of the land here in Canberra, the Ngunnawal and the Ngāpuhi tribes, and my respect to the Crown Prince of Tonga, who is residing here with his family, Prince Tupu'a Kalala, and also the High Commissioner of Tonga to Australia, Her Royal Highness, Princess Latu Fuiteka, and all the lineages, leaders, political leaders here and also in the Kingdom of Tonga. Welcome to all Tongans who are watching from different parts of the world to this program, and I'm here with my guest for today, Luseane Tuita-Nakao Lafitani, who is going to tell the storytelling about the Mauis in ancient times and some of their contributions to the cultures and history of the Moana and Tongan people. Without further ado, I'll pass on to Luseane to start, and then I will follow her accordingly. Thank you. MALO abita Luseane.
Thank you, Professor Lafitani, for that introduction. And as he said, we are talking today or telling stories today about Maui. Maui the god, or Maui the demigod, or Maui just a very important person who lived and worked and did all sorts of things in the Pacific, in Polynesia, Moana. And I think there's so many things have been written about Maui, so many discussions, intellectual discussions about Maui, so much, I guess, their stories and their myths, and everyone's claiming that his or her or their story about Maui is the real story. I think Siwa, where I've come to with trying to find out a little bit more about Maui, is the idea that Maui was everywhere. And
Certainly.
all our stories, it doesn't matter who tells the story, all our stories have a truth to it. It talks about our myths, our history, our culture in the Pacific, in Moana. So whoever tells a story, it's like when you tell your children a story. And they'll pass that story on and they'll say, Nana told me that story, so therefore it's true. And they will meet a friend who came with a story from their grandmother or their grandfather. And they'll say, Papa told me this story, therefore it's true. I think the reality is, Siwa, that all the stories about Maui are true. They all reflect the life, daily life in the islands, in the Pacific or Moana, in those earlier days. And I think because we all share the stories about Maui in the fire, Maui pushing up the sky, Maui fishing up the islands, which is the big story in the Pacific. Maui fishing up the islands, Aotearoa, Hawaii, Tonga, Samoa, everywhere. That's, they have the story of Maui fishing up their island.
Yeah, Maui's fishing there, Lucy.
That's right. And
on the picture,
each culture, each island has pictures of who they perceive Maui would be. A demigod. He had a mother who was a mere mortal and a father who was a god. Or he had a father who was a mere mortal and a mother who was a god. So like the stories of the Greeks, the demigods, Hercules was a demigod. He wasn't full-blooded god or full-blooded earthling, because his father was a god and his mother was a commoner, not a commoner, an earthling or person on earth. So we can all decide today or whenever that when we talk about Maui to our children or to our grandchildren, that we think about our culture and how we've grown up and the stories we've heard from our parents and grandparents and the elders in our tribes, and tell the stories that we know, because that's how stories and legends and myths are passed down. But we all know that there are reasons to why the stories of Maui came to be. When you think about Sio, the story about pushing up the sky, I think about, because Maui was thought to be a demigod who was a bit cheeky. He was very busy doing all sorts of things. But what we know about Maui was that if there was something that needs to be done, Maui was there. He was one of those people, I guess, in a village that if anyone needed help, there was one person you could rely on and you could go to. He was the go-to person. In the Pacific, Maui was the go-to person. If something was happening, you went to Maui and asked him to fix it. His family, his mother, the people in the village, people on the island.
And you're talking about Maui Kisikisi here.
And they talk about, yes.
In particular, yeah.
And the thing is, Siwa, the names, even the names tell me that even the names, not that they're not important, but there is great argument in who it was. Was it Maui Kisikisi? Was it Maui Atalanga? Was it Maui Motua? Was it? But I don't think that that's the important discussion.
It's right.
I think, those things are not as important as the story about why was there a story told about bringing the fire up from the underworld. In Hawaii, they don't talk about the fire coming from underworld. It's Maui watching chickens, and they were cooking. These chickens or these hens were cooking. So he went to peep and find out how they were making fire. And he managed to learn from the chickens how to rub sticks together to make a fire. But because they were a little bit, these chooks, as hens are, they didn't want to share their knowledge about making a fire. So they were a bit, it took Maui a while to talk them into telling him or showing or sharing how to make a fire. So he was a little bit peeved off by this. So when he finally found out how to make a fire, which is rubbing sticks together, he actually took a stick and I guess he hit one of the chooks on the head, causing it to have a red forehead. And these hens or chooks in Hawaii have a red forehead. But that was because Maui did this, because they were a little bit slow in telling him the story. So these are, in the Tongan story, Maui went to Lolofonua, to the underworld, to get the fire from Maui Motua. So there are reasons why. It's a little bit, I think our talk about, our story about Maui, bringing the fire up from the underworld, is very like the Prometheus, the Greek story of fire being brought up from the underworld. So when you think about it, thousands of miles of the Pacific, and yet they share the story of Maui. The islands, there's about 4,000, 5,000 miles or kilometres apart from these islands of Polynesia, and yet we all share the same story, or very similar stories about Maui and his antics. What he was up to. Why did he do that? What was that story about Maui holding up the sky? Because there wasn't enough light. Too much darkness. So people are saying, Maui, please come and help us. Hold up the sky. What did that mean? Was this another story about Maui trying to help the people, because the people on top of the hierarchy were being a bit cruel and aggressive and oppressive.
That's the message.
Yes, that's the message. So Maui came and I guess he was, if he was a freedom fighter, he would have come and he would have spoken to the people in power, and he would have said, look at these people, they can't do their work properly because you're oppressing them. If you stop doing that, they might be able to work a little bit better and production will be a little bit higher. So obviously he was a go-to person to help them, and just to talk and to make sure that people's needs were met. He was good at fishing, so he was so good at fishing that he fished up islands, this is what we know. But he was good at fishing, and so he showed islanders how to catch fish, feed the islanders. He was also good at so many other things apart from holding up the island. And I think Siwa, some of the stories that we hear about Maui, if, as I said, if we not look at the details, look at, the names and but if we look at just the story in itself, we will learn so much more, don't you think? So much more about what the Maui stories were, or why they were told. Why these myths and legends about Maui were told and retold all through the ages in Polynesia.
I think, Lucy, thank you. Firstly, I would like to thank you for the introduction about Maui, and also you have provided a general perspective and some particular issues about their importance. Also, you mentioned, Lucy, that the individual Maui is not that important, but the waves of the Maui, the movement, the social movements, whoever among them, we know the fact that there were several of them. And what I have picked up from your introduction and your general outline of the whole saga of Maui, that there were people or individuals who always stood for the freedom, freedom fighters. They were explorers, they were gods in some way, they were leaders, political leaders and so forth. They love of beauty, and it reflects in some of their works. But I'll come back. I'll come now to your question. Why they retold the Maui story throughout the ages? Lucy, they retold because of the momentum and the greatness of their work, and because they contributed great deeds to our history, and they traveled. Their foot prints are seen in different islands and in different places throughout Moana or the Pacific here, and that's why people, as a result, they tended to call them semi-gods or the gods. In the sense, I think it's in the sense that they were great people in different ways, and they produce also different lineages, and chiefly and kingly lineages were derived or can be traced back to them. But I'll pass on back to you, Lucy.
Yes, I think so, Sue, and I wonder whether, the talking about Maui was also talking about someone in your island, because we all say we talk about Tonga, we talk about Samoa and Fiji, talk about Hawaii. When you talk about in Aotearoa, there's always someone, because there's always someone renowned person who's done a lot in those, in those places. We just happen to call everyone who did great work Maui. And maybe that was a word in the past
Icon.
for a very special person. Like if say Sione in Tonga was a well-known fisherman, and he was a great man, and he told great stories and he helped people, and so he was given the title. Maybe Maui was a title. So he was installed by the king or by the nobles a title, the Maui Title. So the Maui Title means he's someone who's accomplished great deeds. Because I was thinking about that, this is why we have so many. Each island or culture in the Pacific has their own Maui and have their own Maui stories, and a freedom fighter and someone who could intervene on behalf of the people. Because we know that Polynesia is a very stratified cultures, and they have the, especially in Tonga and Hawaii, they had the kings, they had the chiefs, they had the commoners. So in those, I guess you needed to have someone who could go between those, move in between those freely. So someone who could do this it seems like that Maui could do this. He could talk to the common people. He could talk to the hierarchy. He could make arrangements between the hierarchy and the commoners. And he was as we said before, he was a freedom fighter.
He was, or they were mediators.
Yes.
And it appears there are two senses of Maui or the Mauis. One, there were historical Mauis, which we believe, they were real people. And like what you said, Lucy, they're also like a wave of social movement or symbol of Maui. Any person who did or achieved great work or a great achievement to society, they refer to them, to him or to them, those people as the Mauis. But they are symbols in one sense, and they are also historical figures, because we can trace Maui by tradition and by prehistory, and also by science today through genetic science.
And I think, I don't know, Siua, but as I'm reading about Maui from all over the place, I'm just thinking how important this person or these people were in the past to our Polynesian lineages and to our islands and to our cultures, language, myths and stories. And I thought to myself, we should never forget. How nice it will be to, because I know that, there's the island of Maui in Hawaii, and we hear people calling, their children Maui. I really like that. I like the way that we're preserving this, this amazing lineage of people or peoples, the Mauis, because of their work, and we need never ever to forget. And I know, Siua, there's a few stories in Tonga. You told me stories about, there's a story of Maui throwing a rock from Ewa, to Toloa,
the area of Toloa, where Tupou College is made.
Why did he stand in Ewa?
Maui Talanga and Maui Kisikisi, the story goes as they could see from there, because Ewa is higher than landscape wise. They could see from Ewa that there was this huge chicken, more. Maybe it's Aotearoa more, that kind of more. Huge more, that more ate and chased around people.
So it's a pretty destructive moa.
It was, and then they threw stone from there to hit to kill the moa. The story goes that they finally killed the moa or moas, but that's always appears to be great people who did great achievements. Yeah?
And wasn't there a stone
and support and help people.
Yeah. Is there a rock? Is there a evidence of this rock that was thrown from?
There are still evidence. Yeah, the evidence of the rocks are still there in Haveluliku, in Halaliku, Likutapu's area.
So what is the name of that rock?
It calls Maui's rock in Hufangalupe, around that area in the southern side of Tongatapu, the main
Oh, so it's in Vaini.
around in Maini, yeah, that area there. Yeah,
Okay. So that's different to the other rock.
Which
that
rock?
I
The rock in what's the name? Fahefa and Hautu and Kala'au. Eh?
Is that
that
Maui's
area.
rock too? Is that known as Maui's rock too?
Not really, yeah. But people refer, because it was a huge rock there on Kala'au, Hautu, Fahefa's beach. The beach there. People refer to works of that kind as Maui's work, like what we talked about before. Any great thing in the past, normally
Attributed to Maui.
There are different huge monuments, stone monuments that were referred. In fact, Lucy, I'll show you this. Look at the triathlon there, Hamonga Maui. It was named after Maui. The first Maui, the one he was regarded as the first Maui, Motua. Yeah? Maui the elder. Yeah? So that's the Hamonga, because the full name here is Maui Hamonga a Maui Motua. Yeah? Hamonga Trilithon, the Trilithon of Maui Motua. But you see why they name after Maui Motua. It's their, for me, it's their respect, their appreciation of the Maui's contribution, because they were regarded as people who always stand
And maybe
defend and protect people in various ways.
and maybe it was a Maui who was the architect of this triathlon, or
Yeah,
Because usually when
it
you
was built after many centuries from the historical. But as you said, before, great things or great people did great works were also called Maui.
That's what I'm wondering.
As simple,
Yes.
in symbolic terms.
Yes, symbolic terms. And we don't have a Ha'a Maui, but how wonderful if we did have a Ha'a Maui anyway. So, the stories that
we talk, Lucy, of Ha'a Maui. They are known in Tonga, the Maui and the Tangaloa, as Ha'a Otua. We use the word Ha'a Otua, the lineage
God.
of the gods.
I see. So because we're saying that they were gods. Not demigods, but gods. That's right?
Yeah, they weren't regarded as demigods in Tonga. They were the principal gods. They were gods and demigods.
But they were working gods.
Yeah, some
They
people
did a
refer
lot
to them as demigod, but in Tonga they were the principal. They were the gods, original gods.
So there were
the main
deities.
gods.
Yeah, there were deities that worked hard. They didn't just, what we presume, or we assume that gods sit and make, look at people and go after them. But the Maui gods were workers.
The Maui.
And they lived on earth.
They were more, secular. They were gods with secular nature. They were working gods. And they were different from the Tangaloa, especially the Havea Hikuleo and the Tangaloa. They were like sacred gods. The Tangaloas were the sacred god of the sky, and Hikuleo of Pulotu, of the, and then the Maui, Mama, the earth. So they are the secular, can be called the secular gods. So we are different in that regard.
Lived on earth.
Yeah.
They didn't live.
They didn't live, especially Maui Motu'a, the first, the Maui the elder. He was living, or he lived under the in the underworld, Lolofonua. That's their different worlds. But interestingly, it seems we had secular and sacred gods in our case. And
which I guess that is why the Mauis were given the names of demigods, because they were not all, they had connections to the earth, to down here. So all the gods that lived up there were gods, Otua. But Maui had connections to the world, to the earth, either via their mothers or their whatever. So that's why they lived down here. In the old Maui was down in the underworld.
Yeah, and like what you said, perhaps that's one reason they were called demigod. Because they were earthly gods. They were there with the people, live with them, protect. Because most of the stories of the Maui, Lucy, and the myths, they are about people. They are, or they were with people, doing things with people.
Because I'm thinking, Siwa, because they were demigods, because they were part God, like they had, one of their parents was from here on earth, they had more of an understanding of people down on earth, and they, in a connection with the earthlings or people like us down here, which is why they hung around on earth and did all that work to help.
Makes sense, yeah.
They could intervene to help us when we needed help, to show us how to do things.
And it appears, Lucy, with that respect, it appears that the Tangaloas were distant, aloof from people and Havea Hikuleo, in their worlds. But the Maui, they were people gods, to put it that way. They were secular gods, they were people's god.
Because I think about
gods.
Knowing that Tangaroa and all of them were up there in heaven or in the Langi, why was Maui on earth? That's a question for me. I don't just accept the fact that they hung around here.
Interesting.
There's a reason. There's always a reason why we tell stories about certain things. Why Maui was down here. Why he was a demigod. Why he wasn't up there with Hikuleo and Tangaroa and Tuita-Nakao and all those gods,
What happened, Lucy, as I recall now, that when they divided the different worlds, Tangaloa was like the Ulumotua, the head of the clan, of the Maui lineages, of the gods, head of the gods. They decided, and he decided, for the Maui to go to the worlds, to Mama, to the earth, earth in particular. So that's where their divisions. Maui, you go to the earth. Havea Hikuleo, you go to Pulotu, afterlife. And then myself, Tangaloa said to him, I will live here in Langi, in the sky. And somehow, the elder Maui the elder, Maui Motu'a, decided, after some years, that's how the story goes, to move to Lolofonua, to the underworld, and live there. So the rest of his mobs, the Maui mob, they lived at Mama, at F. That's their division, as I recall. That's how the story goes.
And that's how one story goes, which is what we know about. All these different stories from Polynesia, from all the different islands, they all have a different story of why they were here, why they've come here, why they do all that. But the story that is like all the stories is the fact that they worked. They were hard workers. They fought for people's rights. They looked after people and they helped people. They were also quite cheeky and played tricks on a lot of people. Played tricks on the gods. Played tricks on other demigods. Played tricks on the people that lived on Earth. If they were a little bit upset about something, they would pay them back. So those are the stories that we know that are so similar all through Polynesia about this person or these people called Maui. But all we can agree on is that they did a lot of work. They brought fire, they moved the sky, they slowed the sun down so that people could do their work. They were freedom fighters, or he was a freedom fighter. So whatever we know about Maui, all we can say is it is with great respect that we have such a person or such a deities or such gods or demigods or a lineage of people called the Mauis who perform these duties, all those years ago when the islands were being populated, because that's where the stories of Maui starts, is when the story of migration began in Polynesia.
Yeah, certainly, Lucy, it deals and it has something to do with our migration story. Yeah? And what we are talking here is about maybe the first wave of migration or the second wave when Moana was settled by people from, as they say, from outside. Southeast Asia or, Southern America or wherever. But I think you hit the nail there. This story has something to do with different waves of migration. Because this Lusa just add this point is I remember our genealogy, our first generation ancestor rather, was a stone Toia Futuna, as they said, in metaphorical terms. And also, from Toia Futuna, there were about 5 generations before it hit the Maui, the Tangaloa, and Habea Hikuleo, as I remember. So, but that story, the story of our creation myth of the creation myth of our beginning, creation myth about our beginning. So it's about migration then.
A story of migration.
A story of migration.
True.
And there are different analysis and interpretations of this story.
So vastly different.
Yeah, but as you said, there are various stories of the Maui, but what we are looking for here within Lo'au University, we're looking to similarities among the stories, because they can be put together as the form of the stories about, or the myths about the Maui. Those storytellings, or those stories that they share common features, or they are common, that's where we can pick the whole spectrum of the whole story.
Because there's one of the stories came through that apparently Maui could have been an explorer. And this explorer named Maui supposedly came from Egypt. This is another story. This is one of those far out there stories that you never know. Came from one of the pharaohs had sent this Maui out to go and travel and to find new lands. And he went and he found all the lands and most places in South America. And from there he came through to the Pacific. And he went through all the islands and found the Pacific, which is why there's all the stories and all the possible stories of the similarities of the Maui stories. And who knows? I mean, of course, that everyone will, everyone has a right to make a story, because when you're researching, you have all the things that you found out. Then from there you build your own story from all the things that you have found out, I could read out from all the stuff from Hawaii, from Samoa, from Fiji, from Tonga. And from that I have to build my own understanding of who this person Maui was and how important he was to the Polynesian way of life and culture and tradition and language. Because he showed people how to collect food. What was the best food to collect? He showed them where to fish for the best fish. So all these varied stories about Maui, we can't say, oh, no, that's not. We have to take those stories on board. We have to think about what is important. What is important? Is it that it was Maui Motoa, Maui Atalanga, Maui Kisikisi? Or is it the fact that fire came from somewhere and someone found out how to make a fire? Whether it was from watching birds, whether it was from underworld, as one of our stories says, whether it was from anywhere else, whether it was from the volcano, someone went down to the underworld, which is where the volcanoes are, and got the fire out. All those stories have some, I guess, there is a sense of reality, a sense of truth in there, and it's hard to not believe it. And it's not about believing every little thing that we, have heard. It's about knowing that some of those things up to now feels like the truth, because that's our stories, that's our myths.
Yeah, and I think, Lucy, we've been doing we're doing this very important role to be partnership with other scholars in trying to root out the importance and the stories about the Mauis. Not only about the Mauis, but the Tangaloas, Hawaii, because, since Christianity arrived, from there onward they tended to tell our stories and our myths as false. It's not true. But now we are teamed together to try to root out that there were some truths in these stories. Maui, or the Maui for us now, together with other scientific studies, they were real people. And their stories were told or were wrapped up in mythical terms, but when we be able to unwrap them, those layers after layers of their poetical, metaphorical languages, then we have begun to see that they were real people doing great things, and there were historical marks that identify their works and their existence in prehistoric time. And when I think, Lucy, of the historical figures, Maui, I think roughly they were either close to the time of Christ or before that, few centuries before that, when we see how stories are or were developed and dispersed around in the Pacific by them and their activities and their contributions.
As we know, about myths and legends, what we do know is that these are stories to reflect what was going on in the day and at the time. That's how people told a story of what happened. It's like you're sitting at home, something happens, and then when you go and visit someone, then you tell them, today I was sitting at home and this happened. This is exactly what our myths and legends are about. It's people carrying the stories of what happened at the time of the day, and they pass that story on. So that storytelling is passed from person to person, or to a person to a group, and it travels. And as we know with stories, you tell someone a story. When they tell someone that story, there's a little bit of change in that story, because that person, that second person, will add their little flavour into it. So maybe by the time the story gets to 10 people, that story's got the flavour of 10 different people in that story. But there's still the gist of that story. Is
the
still
form.
A form hasn't changed.
That's
it's
right.
just that there's little additions to that story.
Yeah, and the contents, Lucy, of the details of every story, every myth, and in this particular case, for that matter, is the Maui. There are always differences in details, but as you said, as you have put it, there are common, there are similarities, and they are those similarities and common features that we bring together and use it like a form that can relate one culture to another, or among us in the case of Moana people.
Yes. Like as you said, the details are different, but the core of that story,
that's right,
it remains. There's there's someone's telling a story about an apple tree, and they'll talk about that apple tree because it has funny leaves, and it has this, and it sits in someone's backyard. But the core of that story is about the apple tree. That doesn't change. It doesn't change into any other tree. It's an apple tree, and all the things surrounding that apple tree are the details that may be different,
Yeah, as we, like for instance, when we talk about Maui, push up the sky, or Maui, stop the sun,
yes,
slow down the sun.
Slow down the sun.
That's the form of the story. The details will be different from Tonga or Maui, fish up the islands. The details may be different from Tonga to Samoa and to others. But the form, Maui, fish up the islands. That's the statement. That's the core, as you correctly put it. And Maui, push up the sun. The same with Paparangi story in the Maori tradition. Push up Rangi, rather, from trying to come down to Papa, the Rangi. And for us, Langi comes down to the earth, to the whanua. So, and the same with the story of bringing the fire from the underworld. It's common in some and not in some, but the form of the story, Maui, or Maui or Adalanga, brought the fire from the underworld to the earth, to Mama, from Lolofonua to Mama. Always the same, no change.
Always the same, and the interpretations we can put in the interpretations to how we think or we feel those interpretations are. The pushing up of the sky or the slowing down of the sun. The sun is the sky, is the top, Olunga, Rangi, the top. We can say that at the time, the hierarchy or the kings or the leaders of the country were oppressing the nation and the people.
That's the message, the simple.
So the sun is the head, you know,
Yeah.
the king. So slowing down the king and saying, hey, stop being so cruel, stop being oppressive. You know, give your people a little bit of breathing space.
A little bit of freedom.
Yeah, a bit of freedom. Let them do their work, because maybe the king will say, right, you have to weave 1,000 mats before the end of this month, and you have to fish up, you know, 20 bags of fish for me to have next week. And it was too much for the people, you know. So Maui came and, you know, did some negotiations and said, hey, king, your people can't keep doing this, otherwise they're going to stand up and go against you. So if you just slow down and make them work a little, you know, give them less work and commend them for the work that they've done, so that you're not working them to death, then, you know, everyone will be happy. You'll be happy because your people look after you. The people will be happy because they've got time and they don't work themselves to death. So I think, you know, I think that maybe those sorts of, you know, talk about him holding up analogies, holding up the earth and, you know, slowing down the sun.
There is this this version in Tonga that the tangaloa from Langi sometimes, you know, I'm just following up what you say. The tangaloa from Langi, sometimes they were cruel to the people. From Langi, they were cruel to the people in Mama, where the Maui resided. And when it's too much, like what you said about pushing up the sun or slowing down the sky, in symbolic terms, then when it was too much, you know, the oppression or suppressing to the people of Mama, where the Maui resided, the Maui acted as go-between, as mediators or freedom fighters. And I think, excuse me, doesn't matter, you know, which time the Maui existed. But I think, Lucy, the important thing, there are messages and themes of their different activities that have been surviving to us. And we should learn and follow, because they were the founders of our societies. Tongan, Samoan, and among others. They were the founding fathers of our Moana and Tongan society. The Maui, the Tangaloa lineages. And I think for me, that another important for them was another, or is another important thing about them. They were the founding fathers of our social, political, economic structures in ancient time. And it's worthwhile for us to really look and talk and trying to peel off the layers so that we can actually see who they are and their importance. They were our gods, they were our leaders, they were founding fathers, they were freedom fighters, they were scholars for us in those, they were thinkers, they were, because every story about the Maui, it's related to something, they explore something new. You know, in Tongan culture, we have a lot of things were brought to us from Pulotu. But with the Maui, from Haweahikuleo, but with the Maui, almost every story of the Maui deals with something new, or something they have to safeguard, or something they have to protect, or something they explore. And they were very adventurous. And they traveled from Tonga, let's say from Mama to Hawaii, to Waihi. They settled there, they traveled to, because I do believe that they were originally from Tonga, the Maui, because it's supported by scientific findings. We were the first Polynesian island, Tonga. And I truly believe the Maui, the Tangaloa, and Avekule, or maybe the Maui and the Tangaloa, were originally from us, and then they travel. They took our cultures and our knowledge, and then travel to New Zealand, Aotearoa, to Waihi and others, and we can find their marks, their historical marks and works in those islands.
And I guess that's a question for people to think about, because that claim that we were the first island to be populated, is that what you're saying, Siwa? With your scientific facts?
Not only
what did you say? That we were the first?
We were the first to be populated by the Lapita people, Tonga, to populate it and settle there. We were the first one, and we have the evidence from tradition in our prehistory, and also from science, from archaeologists.
Yes,
So
but they're also finding other things in other islands all over Polynesia.
No, there is no
cliffs and all those things that they've found
yeah.
in other islands. So
Yeah.
I guess what I'm trying to say is that
Yeah,
it doesn't matter about who did this first and who got the Maui stories first and who.
I started to claim the Maui.
After all this conversation about let's not go into details and who did this
because
first.
Someone in our Api for All program, my program with Millennium, and one of the one of the people there watching us asked, the Maui here in Hawaii, in Maui, where they came from, and then I explained the same thing I just explained to you. They were originally from Tonga, the Maui originally from Tonga, and we are the oldest Polynesian cultures in Polynesia.
You're still going into details, is what I didn't want us to go into.
No, it's not details,
And
it's the form
claims,
of things.
all these claims that I don't even want to get into, claiming we were first this and we had the first breadfruit tree and the first this.
We definitely
I'm not interested in that at all.
Cradle of Polynesia.
At all today, I just want to talk about the Mauis and how they, and all the amazing stories about the Mauis and the Maui lineage, and how important it is for us to keep those stories happening and to keep talking about the stories, because there are so many arguments and so many stories and so many people talking about who is right, which Maui story is right, which is the first Maui story. Just like our professor here claiming that Tonga was the first island in the Pacific to be populated, and I cannot
not in the Pacific, Lucy, to add in among Polynesians. We were the first, not among the whole Pacific Islands. Polynesia. We were with proof. I only mentioned that because at the end we have to bring out where the Maui originally came from.
And I don't want all the people from all the different islands to start sending us all the proof of what they think that they were first. This is not about that. I don't want to claim anything today.
No, the other islands were settled by us.
We're just talking about, that's another story for you, Professor, to go on to, is to the settlement of Polynesia, the Polynesian islands. Today we're talking about the beautiful story of Maui and all the lovely things that Maui did, all the funny things that Maui did. He was a demigod, I believe. I believe his mother was from Mama, from Earth, and his father happened to be maybe Tupu'a or Tangaroa, one of those major gods, as we say. But he lived on Earth. He did all his expeditions was all around Polynesia and the Pacific. He travelled, he told stories, he taught people how to be, he intervened on their behalf when they were in trouble. He was the go-to person in Polynesia. If you had a problem or had a question, you went to Maui. Even though the story of Maui in Tonga about him fishing up some of the islands, he actually went to Samoa. So he went to Samoa to borrow a hook from a Samoan man, a fish hook. So for me, Samoa was already there. There was no Tonga. He had to go fishing to get Tonga. He had to go to Samoa to get the fishing hook.
But the name of the Samoan person was Tonga Fusifonua, so he was Tongan.
But you know what?
Because no Samoan will name a Samoan Tonga. Tonga Fusifonua, only Tongans.
How do we know that we didn't get the word Tonga from Samoa?
Because it
was a Samoan word, Tonga.
Samoa was part of Tonga and Tonga was part of Samoa. They were two of the same people.
I'm just thinking of the story that was told that Maui went to Samoa to get a fish hook
from Tonga
Samoa. And the Samoan's name was Tonga. Eh? So when Maui fished up Tonga, he thought, oh my goodness, I got this fish hook from Tonga. I will call this little island Tonga to that Samoan man named Tonga. So
there is a contradiction there.
So there's the reality. And because I've got a lot of Samoan blood in me, I believe that Samoa named Tonga. That there was we had the fishing hook, we gave it to Maui, he fished up this little island, and Maui, because he was so grateful for this fishing hook, Maui said, because that's what we do, Maui said, oh Yahweh, I'll name this little island here Tonga, because Tonga gave me the fish hook. And he went and said, Tonga, I've named this island here Tonga after you, Tonga, from Samoa.
But that's why I said before that the Mauis, the historical Mauis, figures of the Mauis were probably existed, just around the time of Christ or 2 centuries before that. Yeah? But why I said that again? Because Tonga was settled 1,000 years before the Mauis. Yeah? And before the Tongans migrated out, like in the case of Maui, to reach other islands, like Waihi and Aotearoa.
But maybe Tonga
Lucy, I think our time, I'll give it back to you to wind up.
See, you've taken up all my time with your discussion about, being the first. But anyway, now we've come to, because we've talked, this is what happens when you have conversation. Dialogue and conversation, discourse. You come to the point where you find something new. And what we've come to today is the fact that Tonga was fished up with a hook by Maui that he borrowed from a Samoan named Tonga Fusifonua. And from what I think after this discussion is that Maui, being the great man that he is and very respectful, gave our island Tonga the name. He named him after this Samoan.
Thank you.
MALO Aupito. Thank you everyone for watching today.
Thank you. And that's the highlight of this program. Tonga was named after a Samoan guy.
And why not? We share DNA with Samoans and all over the Pacific. When you go and have a DNA test, it tells you of where you come from. And blood doesn't lie. So there you go. Tongan, Samoans, doesn't matter. We're all children of Maui. Thank you so much for listening and watching today. Mahalo.
Mahalo of Lahayat.